Um, I did assertiveness and sexuality training with Anne Dixon. I'm a psychotherapist, a rape and sexual abuse counsellor, and former advocacy manager for people with disabilities, founder of YES, the Youth Empowerment Service for adolescents with mental health issues. More recently, I'm an award-winning documentary maker, which is as much as a surprise to me as anybody else. I'm an Amherst writer, as an artist, creative writing facilitator, editor, poet and author with an MA in writing, in creative writing at DCU in 2019. I'm mother to 3 amazing adult children. I can't believe that my baby is going to be 40 next week. 4 grandchildren and 2 great-grandchildren. And I live with 3rd stage COPD. I've also put in a link there to my documentary for any of you who might want to listen to it later or at some stage. I think Declan is going to put this up on the site later. So let's look at what we're talking about here. What is assertiveness? And people often get assertiveness confused with aggression. Assertiveness is the art of clear, honest, open and direct communication of positive and negative feelings. It's never aggressive. It's never passive either, and it's never indirectly aggressive. And I'll explain what those are as we go on today. You're being assertive when you express your own needs calmly and confidently without forcing them on others. Assertiveness is sometimes confused with aggression, but the two are very different. Assertiveness is based on balance. It means considering your rights and needs as well as those of other people. And when you act assertively, you show confidence, empathy, and compassion. What it isn't, it's not about getting your own way. People often think that, oh God, yeah, that's what it's all about. I just have to say something assertively and I get what I want. You may end up getting what you want in a given situation, but it's not about always getting your own way. It's not about bullying other people either. Do you know, it's not about making them do what you want. It's not about dropping vague hints in the hope that someone will take the hint. Do you know that kind of thing? You have a birthday coming up and you're kind of hinting around what you might like to get for your birthday, and you open up the present on the day and it's a vacuum cleaner or a pressure cooker or something like that, you know, and you're kind of thinking, yeah, actually what I really wanted was a trip to the Bahamas. Assertiveness is not about expecting others to read our minds. And very often we think that, you know, when we're living with other people, sure, he should know what I want or she should know what I need, you know, and we can't expect others to read our minds. It's not just about saying no either. And a lot of people kind of think assertiveness means saying no. It's about saying yes to the things that matter to us, and being able to say no to the things that don't matter to us. So I'm going to show you 4 different behavior types, and you see if you recognize yourself as I go through these behavior types. And just, it's not about kind of calling you out on anything. It's just, if this is the kind of behavior you're engaging in, maybe you need to look at it and see if you can make it more assertive. So the first behavior we're going to look at is passive behavior. And the person engaging in passive behavior is one who rarely asks for what they want. They find it hard to make decisions about minor things. You know, the type of person, they go into a restaurant, they look at the menu, they turn it over, they look at the desserts, they turn it back over to the main courses, and they're kind of finding it difficult even to make a decision around what they're going to eat in a situation like that. They find it hard to make decisions about small things. And when they do speak up for themselves, often find that they're not heard, because people are so used to them opting out that when they actually opt in, they think they're not hearing them right. Often we can be passive at work and aggressive at home, or vice versa. Do you know, there's no such thing as a completely passive person. If you were, you'd just be lying there, you know, and not engaging at all. People who engage in passive behavior often see themselves as victims. God, why does everything always happen to me? Do you know, I didn't do anything to deserve this. What's going on here? Do you know, that sort of thinking, you know, we see ourselves as victims when we behave in a passive way. Passive behavior doesn't recognize our own rights, and it puts others' needs before our own all of the time. And it's a powerless place to be, you know, when you feel as if you don't have any power. And I'm sure some of you will recognize being like that from time to time. I certainly would recognize that in myself, that I can be passive. I can be, I have to work on not being passive. I can actually, instead of saying no to something, I can offer to do things when I don't really want to do them, so I have to watch that one for myself. So this is our family joke here. I have to do everything around here. And that sometimes passive people feel like that. God, everything is left to me. I'm the one that has to do the whole lot. So let's look at aggressive behavior then. And aggressive behavior ignores the other person's rights. So the aggressive behavior it's the complete opposite to passive behavior. So when we're being aggressive, and we all get aggressive from time to time, we're ignoring that the other person has rights, and we can bully the other to get our own way. Aggressive behavior can be anything from angry outbursts to stubbornness or violent rage, or just even that kind of I'll show you when we're saying no, how we say no aggressively. It's impossible to be aggressive all of the time. Even the most aggressive people, will have moments when they're docile, when they might go home and pet the dog or something like that, and aggressive behavior is the direct opposite to passive behavior, as I said. And it's about having power over other people. And who do they usually get power over? The poor old passives. So you have the passive person powerless, the aggressive person, the aggressive behavior is power over, and neither of them are equal. So this is the aggressive type. Now, where my slides have just jumped, just 1 second. Okay. Then you have an indirectly aggressive behavior. Now, people who engage in indirectly aggressive behavior often use sarcasm to get what they want. And you'll recognize it. They'll also use humor, often putting the other person down in the process. Yeah, right. That kind of an attitude is quite often indirect aggression. It can be sly and slippery to deal with, and indirectly aggressive behavior often leaves the other person feeling confused and undervalued. And people lose trust in the person who uses indirect behavior. One of the indirect aggressive behavior scenarios that comes to mind is I had a friend who used to make arrangements with me, and she'd say, I'll meet you at 2 o'clock on Tuesday. And she'd arrive late. And I'd be waiting, I might be waiting 20 minutes and she'd arrive. And I'd say, I've been waiting for 20 minutes. And she'd say something like, actually, it's only 20 minutes, whereas it was my 20 minutes that I'd been waiting for. But really what was going on was she didn't want to be there at 2 o'clock. She was saying yes, and then she was turning up late. And I found myself doing that sometimes as well, where I said yes to something and then really didn't want to do it and ended up turning up late. Or no, I've never not shown up, but I can see that people might do that as well. So indirectly aggressive behavior often leaves us confused and not trusting the other person. And then we have the assertive behavior. Assertive behavior recognizes that I have rights and needs, but so do you, so do other people, yeah? It makes clear, unambiguous statements, acknowledging feelings when it's necessary to acknowledge feelings. It respects me, it respects the self, and it respects the person on the receiving end of the behavior as well. And it's equal. It's not needing to put other people down in order to have our needs met. So it's about sharing power. And when we looked at the aggressive and the passive behavior, they're about getting power over or acceding power to. And the indirectly aggressive behavior is about not knowing where the power is. But assertive behavior is about sharing the power between two people. So it's that idea of I'm okay and so are you, that it's not about kind of having one up on you or letting you have one up on me. So everyone has rights, and this is where we start with the assertive behavior. And I would encourage you to write down a list of what you feel your personal rights are. And when I'm talking about personal rights, I'm talking about things that I believe that I have a right to. So for instance, I have a right to ask for what I want. And that could be anything from asking somebody to put their dishes into the dishwasher, or to pick up their underwear from the floor after themselves, to asking for a raise at work, or asking for something in a shop or whatever. I have the right to be treated as an equal human being. Now, we all have that right. It's enshrined in the Charter of Human Rights to be treated as an equal human being. I have the right to bodily integrity. I have the right to decide what I want to do with my own body. I have the right to say no or yes for myself, without, feeling bad about saying no or yes, whatever it happens to be. I have the right to make my own decisions. Now, unless you're a ward of court, or you've handed over power of attorney to someone else, you do have the right to make your own decisions. And remember that all of these rights have consequences, have responsibilities attached to them. So if I make a decision today and it doesn't work out, then I have to accept the consequences of that decision. But all I need to do is make another decision, so I do have the right to make my own decisions. I have the right to determine how I live my life. That might seem like a huge thing to some people, but I'm talking about in terms of what do I want to do with my life myself, Now, as I said in my introduction, I'm the mother of 3 children and 4 grandchildren and 2 great-grandchildren, and I live with COPD. But I still have the right to determine how I live and what I do with my life, independent of what they might feel. And so have they, so have they. I have the right to dye my hair purple if that's what I want to do, or yellow, or whatever colour I want it to be. That's my decision. Now, I still have to live with the consequences of whether I dye my hair purple or yellow or whatever it happens to be. So, an I statement is how you learn to speak. You being assertive. You've got to start with deciding what it is you want, and start with the word I. I want to, whatever it happens to be. Try to be clear and concise. So I'll give you an example of this. And if you're supposing you take a situation where you might be in a coffee shop and you're served a cup of coffee that's cold, and you want to return the coffee to the person who has served you. Now, remember that it's a very basic situation, but you can use the same skills in any situation. You decide what it is you want. What do you want? You want to be able to ask for a hot cup of coffee. You start with the I. I'd like a hot cup of coffee. You need to be clear and concise. This coffee is cold. I'd like a hot cup of coffee. And sometimes you may need to repeat, and I'll go into those a little bit further later on. You may need to repeat like a broken record. It's called the broken record technique, actually. But the first thing you have to do is decide what you want. And very often people don't actually realize what they want. So you've got to work it down. People will say things like, I want my mother-in-law to treat me better. But that's a huge thing. People will say, I want my children to respect me. Very big thing. So what is something that you really, really want? What's one thing that you could start with? And we have to start small. And what stops us from doing this is poor self-esteem, lack of confidence, and old patterns of behavior. So if we've always been the victim, or we've always been aggressive, then it's very hard to actually change that to be assertive. Now, also, if we've always been aggressive and got our own way, it may be very hard to actually shift that. If we've always been passive and never got our own way, It could be a lot more difficult to actually change that as well, but it's not impossible. We have to start with, if we look at saying no, for instance, an aggressive no, if you're saying, what's an aggressive no? An aggressive no could be anything from get lost to F off or whatever, you know, or it could be just no way, you know, that's an aggressive no. An indirectly aggressive no leaves the other person confused, you know, so often what an indirectly aggressive person will do is say yes and then change their mind. Now, there's nothing wrong with changing your mind, but you need to actually be very clear about whether you want to say no or yes in the first place. A passive no is a yes, and then the other person believes you, you know. So you say yes to something and you agree to, oh yeah, it's grand if you come for the weekend, you know. It's fine, it'll be lovely, you know, to see you for the weekend. And inside you're saying, oh, sweet Jesus, if these people arrive on my doorstep this weekend, what am I going to do? You know, so it's like it's being that the other person believes that you've said yes because you wanted to say yes. And you've said yes because you're just being passive. An assertive no is clear. It's okay to say no. And I meant to put into that slide, actually, I might adjust it later. No is a full sentence. You don't need to put anything before it or after it. No is no. Okay, so what stops us from saying no? Very often we think people won't like us if we say no. I'd be too embarrassed. You know, we say things like, God, I'd be too embarrassed to say no. I've old messages around saying no. Do you know, stuff like, I'd be very conscious of this now because I have a 4-year-old great grandson who would break your heart. He just says no, you know, and it's very, very hard to say to him, don't you say no to me, you know, because the old messages we have are, don't you say no to your mother, or don't say no to the teacher, or don't say no to the adults, you know. And you see, children are born being able to say no. You try to feed a baby food that they don't want, and what do? They shake their heads, they spit it out at you, do you know. They know how to say no. But we actually teach children how not to say no. So we tell them it's not nice, it's rude, it's bad behavior, it's unacceptable. And is it any wonder then, as adults, we end up not being able to say no clearly and directly? It follows, you know, we're being good when we're not saying no. It's very often people would think it's rude. It just seems rude to say no. And that it's not in our nature, but it actually is very much in our nature. If babies know how to do it, then, you know, what stops us from saying no is ourselves. So it's just one word. It's a full sentence. Don't be afraid of it. Okay. And if you want to engage in any of these behaviors, and I will look at the assertive behavior a little bit more in a few minutes, you have to start building your self-esteem, because you won't be assertive unless you feel good about yourself, you know. And the best tip I ever got for building self-esteem was to treat yourself as if you're your own best friend. And a woman said that to me in a training course, I'd say about 30 years ago, and it just stayed with me since. Now, what does that mean? You know, very often we get up in the morning, we look in the mirror and say, oh, sweet God, look at the state of you. Now, if your friend came into the room, if your best friend came into the room, you wouldn't say, the first thing wouldn't be, oh God, look at the state of you. You know, we'd say they look nice, or, you know, God, you look great today, or whatever. We might make them a cup of tea if they were feeling a bit low, you know, or we might encourage them to go for a walk or do something, you know, that pleases them if they were feeling a bit low. So if we can learn to do that for ourselves, we'd be on a winning streak. Congratulate yourself often. You can't see my room here, but, well, actually, you might be able to see some of the things. I have my gong from New York sitting over my shoulder here, so that I can see it when I'm on Zoom myself. I also have in front of me, I have cards from different people, just little, you know, cards that people have sent to me. And one of them here, I'm just looking at, says dream big. Another one says thinking of you and always here for you. And I just put those around the place so that I actually feel good about myself. Affirm yourself as well. Affirmations are great things for raising your self-esteem, to believe, to change your belief about yourself. The other thing I put in there was that you're not your illness. I wondered about whether to even put this in my introduction, that I live with third stage COPD. I live with it. You know, I'm coping with it. I'm dealing with it. My life is not my illness. I am not defined by my illness. Surround yourself with beautiful things insofar as you can. And beautiful things don't have to cost anything, you know. We were out blackberry picking yesterday. The sun did shine here for a little while yesterday. And the older of the two great grandchildren went into this field, and he has autism, and it was actually in somebody's garden, and he took 2 daisies out of the garden and handed them to me, and he doesn't realize that they belong to somebody else, but it was just lovely to get the 2 little daisies, and I brought them home, and they're sitting on the kitchen table now, you know. And that kind of thing, it doesn't have to cost you a fortune to surround yourself with beautiful things. Start an ego booster file. I was saying this to Sarah Ward a few weeks ago about the ego booster file, and she jumped on it. She said, "Oh, I'm going to start one of those." And what I mean by an ego booster file is this: sometimes somebody give you a compliment, or you might get a nice card from someone, or you might get a photograph that you know you like yourself. Put them into a place where you can look at them. Maybe just a folder, you know, or an envelope or something like that. And when you're feeling a little bit low, take them out and look at them. And it might be, God, Sean Delaney said on Tuesday that I looked really well. Write it down, put it into the Ego Booster file, leave it there, take it out when you need to congratulate yourself or need to rate it. A bit of interference going on there. I don't need to mute someone, Declan, do you? No. Okay. De-stress your life. This is a friend of mine who was diagnosed with Hodgkin's disease many years ago. Said that she actually decided to get rid of all the stresses out of her life. And I said, how did you do that? You know, because you still have to pay the ESB and you still have to pay the rent and that. And she said, yeah, there are things that are ongoing, you know, but I just made it simpler for myself. And I also stopped being friends with people who were causing me stress because I don't need to be around them. And but I was thinking, God, who's causing me stress in my life? You know, you know, it's actually managing your own stress. How do you do that? And you find ways of doing that for yourself. Could be through yoga, could be through exercise, whatever it is that works for you. Choosing happiness builds your self-esteem as well. Now, I'm not talking about, you know, we don't have to be happy all the time kind of thing. But the secret to happiness is freedom. We need to be free to be happy, you know, and to choose happiness. I have a sign, one of these air fresheners in my car, and people often remark on it. It says, I think I'll do it today, you know. And so maybe adopt that philosophy. Just be happy today, you know, or happy for this hour, or whatever it happens to be. And it is a choice, and it can be really difficult sometimes to make that choice. It can be very difficult to make the choice sometimes. But the secret to freedom is change, you know. If you want something to be different, change it, you know. You have the power to change it. And remember that happiness is the journey. It's not the destination. We're not trying to become happy. If we are happy, we'll get to where we're going. So here are the skills of being assertive. Are you all with me so far? Just give me a thumbs up for those I can see. Yeah. Okay, good stuff. Okay, so the skills are to be specific. If we take the coffee example that I gave you earlier on, you have to decide what it is you want and be specific. I'd like a fresh cup of coffee, please. This coffee is cold, okay? Ask clearly and directly for what you want to be different. Repeat your request. Now, supposing the waitress or the waiter said to you, that coffee was just brewed, you know, nobody else complained about it. Avoid taking the bait. Don't get caught in there. You don't need to you can acknowledge what the person has said, but you don't need to get caught in there, because once you get in, once you take the bait, you're then reeled in. So you end up getting into an argument with the other person. So don't take the bait. It might be something like, I realize that nobody else has complained, and then use the broken record. But this coffee is cold and I'd like a hot cup of coffee. So it's very clear. And you don't have to get into saying, who do you think you are telling me that the rest of the place hasn't complained? You don't need to do that. Use self-disclosure where it's appropriate. And self-disclosure is a great tool to use. Self-disclosure is about actually saying how I am right now. So it could be, look, I feel awful saying this, but this coffee is cold. I'd like you to replace it with a hot cup of coffee. Yeah. So don't apologize. And you know, we have an awful habit of doing this. I don't know whether it's an Irish thing, but we apologize when people bump into us in the supermarket with their trolleys. We apologize to the trolleys. Just be careful about the apology. You don't need to be going around saying we're sorry the whole time. And don't start off any assertive interaction with I'm sorry. It could be, you know, it weakens your argument straight away. There's nothing wrong with an apology where it's required, and you can acknowledge the other person's feelings when it's appropriate. So it might be something like, to go back to the coffee example, I'd like you to replace the coffee. I'd like a hot cup of coffee. And the person might say something like, well, everybody else says the coffee's all right. I realize that everybody else says that, but I would like you to replace the coffee. I know it can be difficult for you, but I'd like you to replace the coffee. So just keep it simple. Okay. And do you see, when you become assertive, you feel okay and the other person feels okay as well. And finally, remember that you have the right to ask for change in another person's behavior. You may not always get what you want, but if you use the skills of assertiveness, you have a better chance of succeeding. Saying yes for a quiet life rarely gets you a quiet life. Notice your immediate or gut reaction and learn to trust it. Did you ever find that somebody asks you to do something and your immediate reaction in your gut is, oh, I don't want to do that. And you say yes. And then afterwards, you realize that actually, do you know what, that was the worst thing I could have done. Now, so try to learn to notice your immediate or your gut reaction and trust it. And write a list of ways in which you could raise your self-esteem. And do it. You know, just do it. So these are my details on the bottom there, madge@gmail.com. And any questions, comments or inquiries, you can send them on to me.